didn't want to provoke a debate on it, and the media was willing to go in and give us a glimpse now and then, but not map it out for us.
They give you mainly the glimpse of the Soviet atrocities, or it appears that it was the Soviet occupation that's creating all of the bloodshed, that this is a legitimate revolutionary or counter-revolutionary force. But they don't go into any detail of how the U.S. is supporting these groups. And there's also nothing about the drug running of these different rebel drugs to say, and of course there's nothing about the CIA actually helping these rebel forces with their drug running to help support their military struggles against the Soviets.
Without mention of the CIA program and the secret war, you do pick up articles about, you know, the drug allocations around the world, and the Golden Crescent is now the largest source of heroin apparently in the world today, right in there where the CIA's been running this operation with its C-130s and C-123s, flying in with arms and flying out with the heroin.
What's the evidence that that's happening? I mean, I haven't even read anything about this, the CIA heroin route.
Well, there have been a lot of things in Covert Action Information Bulletin where they've traced, well, first of all, historically, the rebels, the groups, have been big dope operators for years. And this is one of the things that the communist government, which later became backed by the Soviet Union, was trying to do away with. They were trying to eliminate drugs from their country. They were trying to establish health and education. They were trying to have some women's lib, give them a chance, and do away with slavery. But when they started doing this and to eliminate some of those drug runners, well, then that's one of the big groups that
it's sufficiently flagrant and open, and that it was the theme of the last James Bond movie, as a matter of fact, set in Afghanistan with these huge plane loads of heroin.
John, there's a byproduct of this. We're assuming that the activities of the CIA in Afghanistan will lessen somewhat as a result of this. Do you suppose?
Not for 2 or 3 years. No, they'll be very busy funding the CIA and the paramilitary, the invisible government, the entire spectrum of it, to build a solid government that with the death squads to pacify the country. I look for a tremendously troubled situation to go on several years, at best.
I see.
Like Lebanon, with every single faction fighting in a situation where no faction can gain control.
As that Afghani professor said with just visible anguish, he said they have condemned Afghanistan to eternal violence.
Wow.
So there won't be any unemployed covert action hot dogs from the CIA who'll be available and looking for work in the rest of the world, like it happened in Vietnam, for instance.
No, they'll just be quieter, and that will be the difference. They'll try to keep it out of sight instead of, like the Contra program, posturing for the press and provoking public confrontations.
Let's look at another place, South Africa. South Africa is so-called getting out of Angola, but they did before. And then they came right back in again when there was, it looked like there was going to be peace in the area. Now, it looks like the same thing happened. They're getting the Cubans to pull out. They got their ears pinned back. They pulled away. But now I understand, I heard where they've actually made some more armed attacks already in Angola.
Three weeks ago in London, in the interviews and discussions, this is very much what we were talking about, was what is the guarantee that South Africa is going to respect this? The Cubans pull out, South Africa pulls out. What's going to keep South Africa is violating every international law and boundary in southern Africa. What's going to keep them from going back into Angola? How long will it be before they put their troops back in? And the answer was 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And now, interestingly enough, Washington's reaction on this, of course, Reagan had a big aid program to Savimbi, and Bush has promised to continue it, and obviously is clearly doing so. Now, Savimbi's pinned down on the border down there now, militarily, and is a little better off than the Contras are, and he was taking a beating, so the South African forces came in to bail him out. The U.S. response. They obviously didn't stand up and say, well, we happen to be in there in force with the CIA and we call the South Africans in. Their statement was, I can just remember, back in the task force scribbling away the wording on the statement, to put...
When you were running the Angola operation.
When we were running, their answer was that it has not been confirmed by any reliable sources that the South Africans are, in fact, back in Angola.
We should, in fact, tell our audience that John Stockwell was the CIA officer in charge of the Angola operation and resigned after that, wrote his book In Search of Enemies that began his process of developing a criticism of the CIA, and has been speaking out as a peace activist ever since. So Angola has basically been a hot point for the whole Reagan administration.
Well, let's strip Angola down just real briefly while we're on the subject. Chester Crocker, Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, was talking to some of us in the Africanist progressive side of things, Jerry Bender particularly at the International School at USC, and promising that he was going to negotiate a settlement for Namibia and get the Cubans out of Angola. And Jerry, a friend whom I respect enormously, said that, if you succeed, we'll give you credit for it publicly. And Crocker succeeded. He pounded away and negotiated away, and it took 6 years, and eventually he worked out a deal where the South Africans would give Namibia its